get started. Not very many announcements. All we have is the next class is June 5th, and that's domestic and juvenile court. It's by one of the magistrates will be speaking. If you want to come to that, make sure you sign up. You can sign up on your way out if you want to, or the same way you did for this one. And the only other thing was the clock is still an hour behind. So if anybody's staring at it thinking, oh my gosh, how much time do we have? We've noticed Angela, our last director, was 6 foot tall, and the rest of us are 5 foot tall, and there are a lot of things that aren't getting done anymore. I'm going to introduce, this is Rebecca Forden, and she is from the Ohio State Law Library. Oh, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
All right.
And I'm going to turn everything over to her.
We have a time.
12:16.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yep.
All right, good for people who want. You guys come back.
Yeah. November.
That's an interesting hope.
Yeah.
That's the challenging part, putting it back.
Yeah.
So we should take credit for that hour. We
Yeah.
just had.
There we go.
Time traveling.
I'm going to leave the door open because of the heat.
It's a little warm.
But do you want the lights on or off?
Can you see the slides okay, or would it be better to have it off? What do you all prefer? Okay, I'll leave it like this,
Okay.
unless I get complaints as we're going. Had to get up there. All right, so hi everyone. Oh no, lost the nail too. All right.
I would call that a nail.
No, I would call that a push
All right.
I can just take it.
Yeah, maybe we leave it until afterwards.
Just take it.
Come on, I can't do this.
Thank you.
So I am a law librarian at Ohio State. Just like a little bit about my background, I was a practicing attorney for about 10 years. I did mostly corporate bankruptcy law. So some of the examples I'm going to be using are like litigation specific. How many people in here are litigators? Okay. Any transactional folk?
Criminal defense.
Criminal defense. Okay. Great. So hopefully my examples aren't too far off. So this presentation is going to be about AI in legal practice. Here's my contact info. This didn't make it in the slides you got, but if you want to download these, they're at this link, or you could just write down my email address, or you can just look me up. I'm happy to take any questions you all have after this. So I'm going to be talking to you about AI in the law, and so first we're going to go over just like some kind of general concepts, make sure we're using the same vocabulary, and then I'm going to talk to you about some of the tools that are out there that you could start using today if you wanted to. And then we'll go through, I have a few examples sprinkled in there, and then we'll go through some kind of like a checklist that I created for you all of like how can you make sure that you're using AI ethically. And then I will try to save time for questions. Before we get started, I'm just curious, like how many people in here have tried any kind of like ChatGPT, generative AI, anything? Okay, about half maybe. How many have ever tried using it for anything like remotely related to your job? Good, okay, good. This is what I was hoping, is that you all would be showing up to this session. So we've got kind of a bit of a mix, but some people with some experience. Okay, so first I want to just talk about what artificial intelligence really broadly is, because you'll see this term used like in judicial orders even, and a lot of the judges don't know quite what it is. So it's a really, really broad term that encompasses not only what we're going to talk about today, which is generative AI and large language models, but also like algorithms, like your standard algorithms that you use in Lexis and Westlaw that they've incorporated for many, many years are considered AI. So we're going to talk about generative AI, one aspect of that, but I want you to be thinking like if you do see an order that says artificial intelligence, think about that for a minute and say, is that saying I can't use Westlaw? If so, I probably need to clarify my use for the judge a little bit. So it can include algorithms, it can include machine learning, which I'll talk a little bit about, and it can include large language models. So I've got this graphic, this whole big circle is artificial intelligence, and then we've got kind of a blue circle on the left, that's large language models, and then a circle on the right that's generative AI, which can include like image generation, video generation is coming out now. I'm just gonna be talking about text. So we're strictly in this crossover in the middle there. Oops, you got to preview my picture. In the middle there of generative AI about featuring language. So generative AI is kind of a subset of machine learning. So machine learning is when you give models a bunch of data. Sometimes you've labeled it, and maybe you said, here's all the pictures of chihuahuas in my data. So the model learns from that and then tries to predict new information that you give to it. So if you give it a new image set and said, okay, now find all of the images in this data set that are chihuahuas, it will do its best based on how you've labeled those images. And sometimes it doesn't work perfectly. This image here is some chihuahuas, some blueberry muffins. So it found features that those shiny circles look like eyes sometimes, but sometimes they're blueberry muffins. So it can be supervised, which I mentioned, where you label it ahead of time, or it can be unsupervised, where you just toss a whole bunch of data at the model and you say, find like things. So like group these based on what is similar. So it can do that. The important thing about it is no one is programming it behind the scenes to say, look for two like bulbous orbs that are black and shiny, and that's how you know it's a chihuahua. No one's telling it that. Instead, it's learning from ingesting all of that data. So there's lots of examples of this that you've seen probably in your everyday life. If you go on Netflix and they give you recommendations, that's machine learning. They've taken all of the people who like similar things to you and shown you some things that those similar people like. If you get query suggestions when you type something into Lexis or Westlaw and it says, did you mean this? That's a form of machine learning. So this has also been around with us for probably like about a decade now in popular use. So then we get to large language models. So these have also been around for a little while, but their use, they've gotten much better. So they try to focus specifically on language. They have huge data sets that they get fed, and they try to understand something about that language that they're given. So again, no one's going to tell them specifically what to look for. Instead, they get a bunch of data thrown into them, and then they can do some interesting things. So generative AI is a kind of a crossover of a large language model. So this is what we'll be talking about. So it's generative, which means that unlike our Chihuahuas example, it isn't just taking data and like classifying it, it's actually generating something new. So in our example with language, it's generating text. So it's not just telling you about what you've put in, it's generating something. And I think an important thing to kind of know about it is that it's as good as the data that it has been trained on. So it's making statistical connections between all the data that it's fed, and then it's telling you, based on all those statistical connections that it's made from that data, here's what is likely to be a good answer to your question. So it's kind of similar to autocomplete, which you all have seen on your phones or on Google. Like I have here, generative AI is, and it gives the statistically likely next words there. So that's what generative AI is doing, but kind of not just on a word level, but on a sentence level or on a paragraph level, saying like, what would a good sentence response to your question be, or what would a good paragraph, or what would be a good like brief answer to your question. So I've got a link to an explainer in here. I know you all have paper copies, but if you just Google that, you'll find it. So if you want to know a little bit more about how it works, hi. We've got a handout up at the front too. So if you want to know a little bit more about how it works, that's a really good explainer. I'm not going to get...
September 12th, 2023.
Yes. Oh, whoops. Didn't get my parentheses here. Yeah, this is from this past September. It's not from the future. So I mentioned that the data is really important in understanding AI, knowing what data it was trained on. So what do we know about what these models are trained on? And the answer is, for the newest models, we don't know. They won't tell us. We can make guesses based on what has been released about previous models, but they aren't releasing their training data for their newest models. They consider it proprietary, and they want to be able to protect those secrets so they can be the only one that can provide that great model. So we're on, if we look at ChatGPT, the model that it's using right now is called GPT-4. The prior one was called GPT-3, and they did release information about that. So we can be fairly confident they're still using that information, but they're also using a whole bunch of other data as well. So for GPT-3, they looked at a data set called Common Crawl, which is basically everything from the internet since 2008, or that's what they try to do. So if you think about what it's been trained on, think about what's on the internet, what you can find on the internet. The next one that I like to point out, because you might have heard some things about, like, is there bias in the data, et cetera, like how do you determine what gets into it? The second data set I like to point out is called WebText2. It's text of all web pages from outbound Reddit links where someone has upvoted it at least 3 times. So it's what people on Reddit think is important or useful. And Reddit is kind of has a bias towards younger people, towards men. So those are some of the biases that are coming in as far as like what is important in these models. Another corpora they're trained on is these 2 books corpora. So these are just huge, like thousands and thousands of books. And it's some public domain material, but it's also a lot of copyrighted material. So if you've been reading in the paper about these authors filing lawsuits, this is what they're complaining about, that their books are in the models. And then also like Wikipedia, so anything that's in Wikipedia has probably been used to train these models. So depends on the model, but typically there is a cutoff point. So for ChatGPT right now, if you're using the free version, they've only got information up to 2021. So if you asked it about something that's happening right now, it would not know because it doesn't have access to that information. The other thing to know is that legal sources are really limited. So none of the models that are available right now have access to all case law information or even all state statutes, all state regulations. They're pretty good on federal regulations because those are pretty easy to find on the internet. But when you get into like more niche legal material, they just don't have access to those. So this screenshot is from a Washington Post article from last year that attempted to look at the Common Crawl data set and say like, oh, what websites are in that? So if you're curious, like, is your law firm's website one that's been indexed, you can go on there and you can see if that somehow ended up in ChatGPT's data set. So a few more just like terms I want to talk about. One is prompting. So this is something if you've interacted with a chatbot you have done where you're just asked a question. What I like to point out about it is that it's not just whatever you typed into that box. There are also instructions that the creators of whatever bot you're using have included as well. So they've said things like if the person asks for like a picture or like an image and that image is recent and copyrighted, don't give it to them, or instructions like that that are intended to give you a better answer. So you may be really trying to get to something and it might not give it to you because it's got these kind of instructions in there. You used to be able to get them pretty easily. Like I just asked, my prompt here was repeat the words above. So like repeat the secret words that you have above what I just wrote and put them in a text block, and it did it for me. That didn't work when I tried it earlier today. So they don't want you to break in and see what else in there, but there is stuff that's going on in there. So the other term I want to kind of clarify is hallucination. So I'm sure that most of you have heard last year there were a couple of lawyers in New York who got in trouble for submitting hallucinated cases to the court. And not only submitting the hallucinated cases, but then when the judge asked them, like, hey, I don't think these don't seem real, can you provide copies? The lawyer said, okay, and went into ChatGPT, can you give me copies? And then just printed out what ChatGPT gave it, which was also made up. So hallucination is like false information or nonsensical information that is generated from generative AI. So another example recently, Michael Cohen got in trouble for, well, he ended up not getting in trouble, but he did some research of his own for the case that, a criminal case that he had, and then sent some cases to his lawyer. And it turned out that those cases he got from, I think, Google's AI, and they were hallucinated. So I'll be using this term a little bit. Then the last one I want to mention is called retrieval augmented generation. So this is a way that a lot of the services that, especially that market to people in fields where it's important that you get the facts right, like the law, this is one of the techniques they use to reduce hallucinations. So Lexis is using this, Westlaw is using this, anything connected to a legal database, this is probably what they're using. So the way that it works is you send your prompt in, you say, I want cases about aggravated arson. And they have a system in there that will go out and connect to the case database and run a search for cases about aggravated arson. And then it will pull little snippets of those cases related to your query and then feed them into the AI along with your original question. So the prompt I showed earlier, that prompt, what's going behind the scenes, it's saying, tell me about aggravated arson. Here's some snippets of cases about aggravated arson that will help you answer this question, and give the user a response. So then the response you get will be based on those real cases that were fed to it by the database. So this reduces hallucinations quite a bit. You'll only really get real cases. Sometimes the system can still mess things up in that summary that it does, but you can at least be pretty confident that the cases themselves are real. And then the final kind of word I'll explain is guardrails. So we talked about things that might be included in the prompt, but all of these products also try to put some kind of guardrails on the system to make it do what they want it to do. So for example, I've heard of some law firms, these big law firms developing their own internal AI where they will put in a little bit of code that will say, if the person tries to paste a case, and here's what cases look like, here's what citations look like, don't answer any questions about it. So you can, people who are making these can put those guardrails in to try to limit what you can do. Another example is, especially after that first case in New York last year, all of these systems were like refusing to say anything about case law. Like if you asked it for case law, it'd be like, you need to look on Westlaw or Lexis. I'm only a chatbot, I can't help. So they've loosened up a little bit since they've kind of improved things. But so if you're running up against like, I can't get what I want, that's another thing that could be going on. All right, so I wanted to sort of summarize for you what tools are available right now. So first of all, you've got all-purpose chatbots. So these are the ones you've read about in the paper. You've probably seen people using them. So ChatGPT is the big one. Microsoft has one called Copilot. Google has one called Gemini, and a company called Anthropic has one called Claude. Each of these has paid and unpaid versions. The paid versions are, I think all of these actually are $20 a month. So that seems to be what people have landed on as a pricing structure. Generally, the free versions will not let you upload documents, and they have a smaller, what's called a context window. So if you try to just like cut and paste a whole document, they would say that's too big, we can't handle that. So the other limitation that many of them have is that they're using like a lower powered model, so your answers might not be as good. The exception, I believe, to that is Microsoft Copilot, which uses the highest GPT model. So if you want to see like what can these things do, you can go on to Copilot. It's copilot.microsoft.com. You can start asking questions in there. So that's one category. The next category is what I'm kind of calling legal multi-tools. So these are things that don't do just one thing, but they have, these companies have tried to create a tool that's easy to use. So you don't not have to be like a master at prompting and coming up with a perfect prompt. You can just go on there and pick a skill that you want to use, like, hey, find me some provisions. I've got like 20 documents. tell me about them, and it'll ask you what do you want to know, and so it's like kind of guided. So some of those are CoCounsel. CoCounsel was just bought last year by Thomson Reuters for like $650 million. So it was a big deal for them, and Westlaw is now like incorporating that into many of their products for a very high price. Like you have to pay for the most advanced Westlaw to get it. Harvey is another one that I've only heard of being at very big firms and only a handful of them, but just one to, like, if you see an article about that, maybe take a look at it, see what they're doing with it. LawDroid Copilot, very inexpensive. I think they're charging maybe like $10 a month right now. And it doesn't have as many features as the other ones, but again, if you're interested, it might be one to kind of get a trial of and play around with. And then I mentioned a lot of the larger law firms are kind of developing their own internal tools. So those are ones that can do a whole bunch of stuff. Then there's a lot of products that really just do one thing, or maybe a handful of things. So the legal research ones are probably ones you've heard most about, like Westlaw and Lexis and VLEX, and a lot of these products are being developed by existing vendors. And then I've got listed a whole bunch of other ones, like there's contract drafting, there's e-discovery, contract review and analysis. There's even ones that, like, their whole mission is to help make it easier for you to draft discovery and discovery of responses. Like, that's how focused some of these products are. I've got this image here just showing, and this was from October, so there's actually a bit more now, just showing the generative AI like startup landscape. So these are all companies that have just popped up in the last couple of years that have tried to use AI to solve really specific things. So I unfortunately don't have time to talk about these in really any detail at all, but I just want you to know it's all out there, and that if you run across something in your practice where you're like, this is really tedious, you could see, maybe run a search and see, like, is there an AI company doing this that could maybe help me. So this is a survey of, this is AMLA 100, so what are they using? The most popular product was CoCounsel, and a handful of them are using like Microsoft products, Westlaw, Harvey, Lexis, and then NetDocs, which is a document management system. But even those ones are using it at pretty low levels. So the most deployed back there was CoCounsel. So this is another survey, same kind of group though. But even then, like, I would estimate that to be like maybe 70 that have deployed it out of, there were, I think, 500 responses to this particular survey. So it's still, you might be reading and think like, I'm getting behind the game, everyone's using this. It's not exactly the case. So this was a survey from earlier this year, late last year, early this year. This is of top firms, and so I think this is, again, AmLaw 200 and Fortune 1000 companies. So you can see a lot of people have used it, but there's still not a lot of purchasing going on. And then I also took a look at this survey from LawPay My Case of solos and small to medium-sized firms. And the adoption is smaller there, like only 24% of those people have said that they are using it in their practice. And again, and then a tiny portion saying that they've actually adopted a tool like firm-wide. But of the people who use it, there's a pretty big percentage that say 53% and 24% say that it has increased productivity at least somewhat, and then some people saying significantly. So it's a pretty big portion of people that have found it useful, at least. And then what are people using it for? So they update this, like everyone asks attorneys. This is the most recent one from January and February that I could find. And legal research always tops it, which always, it puzzles me a little bit because that is not what I would use it for. And we've seen like many examples of people getting in trouble for finding cases that don't exist. But I am going to show you a little later some safe ways I think there are to use it for legal research. But then you've also got things like drafting emails and letters, drafting contracts, summarizing legal narratives, reviewing legal documents, and then get kind of down smaller, like negotiating contracts, e-discovery, due diligence. So I think most of the uses are where people want to generate something like fairly simple, or that they want to look at a big but not like so big as e-discovery size of amount of data. So let's talk a little bit more about the multi-tools that I mentioned. So again, this is like CoCounsel, Harvey, LawDroid, and then the internal products. So they typically, I mentioned, have like predefined prompts for you. So you can say, I want to summarize this document, and they've already done all the prompting in the background to make sure you get a really good summary. Or I want to run a search across all these documents, and I want you to summarize the things that you found on a particular point. Like, for example, going through like a set of like 50 contracts and pulling out the provision in each of them that addresses like force majeure or something. So they could summarize all of that. So they've done the work of making sure those prompts are good for you. And I've listed out some of the things that they can do. They also have other advantages over the all-purpose like ChatGPT kind of things. One is that they are really trying to solve the security confidentiality issue. We'll talk about that later, but obviously you've got to be sure anytime you're using client data and you're putting it into an internet product that is being protected. So they are trying to solve this for the people that they work with. They also typically have much larger what's called context windows. So I mentioned that all of the free ChatGPT, Claude, et cetera, they have a limit on what you can put into them. That's the context window. So you couldn't upload, even to the paid versions of Claude, you couldn't upload like 100 documents. I think you can upload 10 even to the paid version. Whereas the ones targeted towards lawyers will let you upload more. And then I mentioned the pre-made prompts, and they also may be connected to firm documents, firm data, and other sources of data like case law. So this is an aspect I think is growing more, and it's harder to duplicate on your own if you are trying to use like one of the regular chatbots. So some of the sources of data that they might use, maybe like a document management system, timekeeping information, matter information. So you could go in and say like, who are my, what clients did I bill the most to in the past year? Who's like create me a report, who still owes me money? Like the kind of things you can create with the software you have now, but you've got to like go through a bunch of menus that maybe you'd be able to do that with prompts. You can also upload documents to them, and they may be able to connect to like case law or other sources of legal information. Most of them use multiple models, so that so there was OpenAI, which creates ChatGPT, was in the news maybe earlier this year because their founder and CEO got first ousted, and then he came back, and there was like a lot of controversy. Is OpenAI going to like fold? And all the people who created these at the time were touting that they don't just use OpenAI, they use other ones. So even if OpenAI did fold, they'd still be okay. So that's kind of another difference. So I've got some resources in here of, so you can just kind of get an idea of the kind of things that people are doing with these products. I also wanted to show you some examples. So anytime like I have like a really big document, or I have a few big documents, or I'm going through like a whole bunch of data and trying to get my hands around it, I now do try to use one of these tools. So this is an example. This case, Thomson Reuters v. Ross, is Westlaw's parent company sued a startup for allegedly stealing a bunch of their case law head notes and using them in their product. This product, Ross, is now defunct. This put them out of business, but their insurers are still letting them go forward with this lawsuit. So I had a whole bunch of docket entries, and I wanted to figure out where things were in summary judgment. So I just cut and pasted the docket entries, and I said, draft an email telling me where things are. And so it was able to comb through that and pretty quickly draft an email that says, here's what the motions that people filed. It's now, briefing has been completed. There was an opinion. It's going to go to trial. And then there's another set of motions where briefing has been completed, but there hasn't been any opinion issued. Yes.
Well, I want you to finish, then I'll ask.
Okay. I think I was done. Yeah.
When you cut and paste a document,
Mm-hmm.
and you put it in, because I do use it quite a bit, you would put a document in, but then it automatically starts, you can't get it all in one entry, right? What's the
I guess
best
it
way to get a
depends.
multiple page document in to have AI review it? And
So I think you're more likely to hit those if you're using the free version, and I do.
I'm using Perplexity,
Okay.
and I'm using, I pay for $20 a month.
Oh, for ChatGPT?
Yeah, I pay for both.
Okay, and it's still giving that. What I usually do if I'm hitting that limit is I'll say, here's the first,
You tell
5
it
or
first in the
whatever.
prompt.
Yeah, I'll
You
say.
I'm gonna put in this, but's more coming, is that what you?
Yep,
do?
yep, exactly. And I might say like, start with this and then wait for the next set.
Okay.
And because if you put too much in and then say, look back at what I've just sent you, like the things you sent first are bumped out of the context window, so it can't see them anymore. So if you ask it to like kind of summarize as you go, then that's one way to get around it. You might also look at other products, like this is Claude 3 here, and it has the highest context window that I'm aware of, and it's $20 a month as well.
Who does that?
Anthropic is the name of the company.
And it has a more extensive amount of documents.
Yes. So I've been able to put like entire SEC filings, like I'll put like the whole 10K and put it in there, and it'll take up to 10 documents. So that's the reason I like it for anything like really document intensive. And I think I've tried all of these, and I think I'm probably still paying for all of these. So
Which
if you
one
do
do you
have
like
questions.
best?
Claude I like best for, like I said, anything to do with documents or large volume. I think it doesn't do images, I don't think yet. So if I want images, I'll use one of the other ones. If I want it to be really secure, I'll use Copilot, because my school's version of Microsoft Copilot doesn't keep the data. So I'll talk about that a little later. So I get it, like I think it depends on what I'm trying to do with it. Claude also doesn't have access to the internet. So if you do use it with internet a lot, it won't be able to do that. So I guess depends on what you use it for. But if you want like the best overall, I still think ChatGPT is probably the best way to go. Like they've just got the most things that they've packed into it, like the most different options.
But they're not up to date, right?
No, but it can go out and check the internet for,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, so that's my one example. Another example is, like a lot of people like to use it for drafting. So I gave it a form protective order that is provided by Southern District of Ohio. And I said, I want you to change this to make it more friendly to people producing documents. So more kind of better, more protection. And so it gave me a whole bunch of suggestions in here about what I might be able to change. So this is ChatGPT doing this at the moment. So let's talk about legal research for a little bit. So I mentioned that there's a lot of tools, existing tools that you might have heard of that are legal research providers that are starting to incorporate this. There's also several new tools that are using expanded case law data sets available to try to do interesting things with research. So I'll talk about both of those. So Westlaw, Lexis, Bloomberg, VLEX, they're using the data sets that they've built up over decades, hundreds of years, right? So they've got all the case law, they've got all the statutes, regulations, et cetera. But just recently, there's this organization called the Case Law Access Project. What they did is they partnered with another now defunct legal research startup, and they scanned every single reporter in Harvard's law library, every single case law reporter. And they added metadata to it, they got the full text of all of those opinions, and the startup got exclusive rights for 5 years, but after that, anyone could use it. So the 5 years just came up in March, actually. And so all of these new companies are now using that data set. So it only goes through 2008 from when the project ended, but then a company called Court Listener goes out and scans all the appellate courts' websites and gets the most recent opinions and puts them into its data set. So the newer products are using a combination of Case Law Access Project and Court Listener to try to get all of the cases. They still have some holes, like in particular, US District Court opinions aren't particularly well covered, but it's quite good for state appellate court opinions and federal Supreme Court and Court of Appeals opinions. So when I'm talking about some of the new products, just be aware that that is what they're using. I think the other probably weakness is that they might not have full like reporter citation information for some of the recent ones, because you think about what they're pulling it from like whatever's on the website that hasn't been given like we're up to now like F4D or whatever, so it hasn't been given that reporter citation. They do get regular donations of citation material from Fastcase, so I guess VLEX now, so it will get updated, but if you're looking at a recent case, it might not have that reporter citation. You might have to go out and get it somewhere else. So I will emphasize this point here. Hopefully you all, by having come here, already know this, but the all-purpose chatbots like ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Claude, they are not for legal research. They aren't going to have all of the cases. They might give you false information. They might give you not updated information. They're based on the internet, and the internet is not vetted and is not complete. There was an example, this is one of the cases that's just kind of like, oh no, we're really in trouble to me, where a lawyer didn't use ChatGPT himself to find cases. He went and he searched Google, and he found an attorney blog, and the blog very nicely summarized cases that were right on point for him. Well, it turns out that the blog had used ChatGPT to generate those cases. So the cases weren't real, even though the attorney didn't use AI to create them. So the internet is not a safe place to find information. And they also, these ones typically don't have like a ton of data protection. So if you are putting in like client information, that's not a safe thing to do generally with these products. But they can do other tasks. So I've had a lot of luck with issue spotting, with getting answers to pretty general questions. So if you think about the type of question that would probably be on the internet, like give me the elements of this crime, or if you're in an area of law that's pretty well covered by commentators, then it might be something that you could get some information on. Or you can ask to generate a research plan for you, like where should I look to find out more about this information? Or if you're having trouble running a search on Westlaw or Lexis or VLEX, Fastcase, like can you generate some search terms for me? And so I think for these related tasks, it does a decent job. Even getting into the legal research products, there's still some things it's not quite ready for. Anything that require them to connect to different products within their ecosystem doesn't work great. So there was a law professor on the internet complaining that when he asked Lexis's product, Lexis Plus AI, to say, show me the recent cases where this Supreme Court decision has been applied, and it just made up a bunch of stuff. So it gave cases from 2025, so it predicted the future. So it's not well suited for that. It's not connected yet to like Shepard's and to like case analytics or things like that. You can't do much filtering in these legal research AI products yet, at least from Lexis and Westlaw. So even with the specialized services, it's not like quite ready for prime time. But there are things, again, that it's good at. Like Westlaw has a product that lets you ask generative AI questions of practical law. I find that really helpful for the kind of questions that you would ask practical law about. For example, like I need a checklist for filing this kind of document, or I need to know like how I run a deposition. So they're kind of targeted towards newer attorneys or attorneys who are kind of out of their practice area. So that kind of thing, like things you might ask a secondary source, are things that the products are pretty good at. I found them pretty good at finding a statute or regulation or summarizing case law where I know there is case law on point. The less that material it has to draw from, the more likely it is to hallucinate. So if I already know, like I know there's some cases on this, just find them for me and summarize. I can do that. So I have a few legal research examples of just using some of the generally available tools. So this is Copilot. This is actually the free version. I just asked it, this is actually the problem I give to my legal writing students. I just asked them, here's the basic facts of my case. It's aggravated arson he's been charged with. Tell me the elements, give me some ideas for what I could argue. So it found the correct elements. It's giving me a site to the Ohio Code, so the Ohio Statutes website, and it's giving me a few potential arguments. So again, like as long as you're kind of keeping it general and thinking about, is the internet likely to answer this question, then it can do it. So this is connecting out to the internet, like I mentioned. So the model doesn't know about more recent things, but it can check the internet and update. So it's gone out and found me a source for that. You still have to be careful of hallucinations. I've had this happen to me multiple times on Copilot and on ChatGPT, where it goes out and it says, okay, here's your summary, and it gives me a nice little answer, and each thing is footnoted. And then when I go to the footnotes, sometimes the website doesn't exist, or sometimes it says something completely different. So sometimes it's creating it first and then adding the citations in after the fact. So there's still a lot that is not perfect, and so it does require like double checking. I did double check all of this. This is all correct. And you can see like the second one is gafirm.com, so I think that's a law firm website. So again, keep in mind that it might not be giving you sites to trusted content. So this is a tool. I wanted to show you a few legal research AI tools that are really widely available. So these are using what I mentioned before, Case Law Access Project and Court Listener. So the first is Describe. This is free, doesn't require any sign up. They've got pretty good coverage at the moment, including in Ohio, of appellate court cases. So what they've done is for the courts that they've finished, they've gone through every case in there and had a summary created. So they created a generative AI summary of each case. And so when you run a search, it's actually searching those summaries. So it's super fast, which I like about it. And it does a pretty good job of finding what I want. So when I look at these results, I see there's one that is on point, Swint. I have to go a little further. Hunter is on point. Johnson is on point. So it's not giving me like 100% relevance, but it is giving me some things to start on. The other one that I really like is called Midpage AI. Again, this is free. This one does require you to sign up, but I put in the same search here: aggravated arson, insufficient evidence of substantial risk of physical harm, and it, let me get it back to the top here. So it's running the search pretty fast. Tucker is on point, Rodano is on point, Johnson, Wolf, Egeman, Hunter. Then they're getting less relevant. CS, Swint, Reed. So a lot of these, it gave me pretty good results. And they are, what I like about them is they're super innovative. They're trying a bunch of new stuff, and it doesn't all stick. Sometimes they like retract features, but a lot of them are really cool. Like you can see like a little circle to the right. I didn't capture this in my screenshot, but if you put in the motion you want and how you want it to come out, or for this example, I put appeal of a judgment and I want it to be reversed. it will light up those circles with green or red, depending on whether it's favorable for you or not. So that's an example of like one of the kind of features they're trying to include. They also have these little things, outcome and compare facts, that you can choose for each case. So if you like click that, it'll give you the outcome for that case, that it goes and summarizes that case. So I think this is a really cool one too, that if you want to just like try out what are people doing, this is one that I would recommend. Again, it might not be 100% complete. You probably don't want to use it as the only source that you use. Okay, so in our last few minutes before I open it up for questions, I do want to talk about a few ethical considerations. So, duty of competence that we all have as Ohio lawyers, Rule 1.1, we just have to be competent, right? The lawyer shall provide competent representation to a client. Comment 8 to Rule 1.1, which most jurisdictions, including Ohio, have incorporated, says that to maintain the requisite knowledge and skill, a lawyer should keep abreast of changes in the law and its practice, including the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology, engage in continuing studies, so while we're here, and comply with all continuing legal education requirements to which lawyers are subject. So we have to keep up to date on technology and, oh, sorry, did you have a question?
Oh, no, it was clear with
Oh, okay. And not use technology that you have no idea what it does. So Michael Cohen luckily had already been disbarred, so he's not subject to these rules. But when he said like, oh, I had no idea that BARD was an illegal research product, that is an example of probably running afoul of this rule. So here's some questions that I want you to ask if you are looking at adopting a product. One is, does it have access to sources that you need? Because that will reduce hallucinations. So if you're trying to find comprehensive case law on ChatGPT, you're not going to, and you might get hallucinations. Is it good for what you want it to do? Can it answer the question that you have? Are there any restrictions that anyone has placed on my use of the product? Consider privacy, security, confidentiality. And then finally, I just like have a question of just like, are we losing something by doing this instead of doing it ourselves? And a lot of people have opinions on it. So sources of data, we've already talked about a lot about this, but if you want to find case law, make sure it has access to case law. If you want to find overviews of the law, it's helpful if it has access to secondary sources. There's other kinds of sources that some of the products may have access to, like SEC filings or PACER documents. So just ask those questions. Does it have what I need it to be looking at? I have a point to just kind of consider tracking and testing things that, questions that you put to these. So it sounds like a lot of you already are using these tools a lot. If there's something that you find that it can't do, write that down. Maybe try it in a few months. Maybe it'll be able to do it in a few months. If you have something that has worked well, maybe save that prompt that you used and you can be able to do it again. Talk to your colleagues. So like you all being here is great. And try to see what are people using it for, what is helpful. So restrictions on use. So there's a few things to consider. One is local rules and standing orders, and I'm going to show you a few of them in a second, as well as ethics rules and opinions. We don't have any ethics opinions that have been issued in Ohio yet, specifically as to generative AI, but other jurisdictions have, like California, New York just came out with some. So that's something to just keep an eye on and read about, obviously, if it comes up. Client consent. So a lot of clients are saying, I'll back up there. A lot of lawyers are worried that clients might say that they don't want their documents to be fed into these models. When I talk to lawyers, they're saying they aren't really seeing that, like clients want them to be using this stuff, but it maybe is a conversation that you would need to have with your clients if you do want to be putting their documents into your systems, assuming that they can be properly protected. And then finally, like, is there a policy, like an internal policy within your firm or within your office? That would obviously be important to know about. When I give a similar presentation to students, I tell them like what your firm says goes. For you all, I'm guessing that would probably be less of an issue, more senior, maybe some of you are setting your own policies, but still important to know if there are any. So here's a few links, again, not helpful in the printout, but if you download the slides, you'll be able to get to it, that kind of say, here's all the orders and rules we know about nationwide. The one I think that's the most comprehensive and also free is called Rails. So if you were to just Google Rails standing orders AI, it would pop up. So I went there and pulled out just the Ohio ones for you. So Judge Newman in the Southern District, Judge Boyko in the Northern District, and then a few judges in other counties, not Franklin, are the ones that we've seen so far in Ohio that have put restrictions. So just keep an eye again on those. If you are practicing about to submit something to a judge you're not familiar with, just maybe check if they have something new. So I mentioned I was going to talk about this, privacy, security, confidentiality. So the questions that I want people to ask about models are, what you put in there, is it being used to train the AI? A lot of them now provide an option that you can turn off, so it's not trained. So ChatGPT has an option. If you go into settings, you can go into, I think it's like data protection, you can turn off that training. Claude doesn't train on your previous conversations. So, but that's something you want to check if that is important to you. I've had professors say they don't want to ask questions about like a novel article they're talking about because they don't want that novel article to end up in the training base that then other people will get access to. Is your data being retained? So this is just a classic cloud computing question. So like if you use anything on the cloud, you want to know, does it, what servers does that live on? And is the person that holds those servers going to be like subject to subpoena if my client data ends up there? Can employees or third parties access data? So you may have an agreement with the vendor that you're using to say that they can't use your data in certain ways, but if they're also letting third parties access that data, is there some risk? Or if you have a like something you've turned off, they can't train on your data, but there may be, so Microsoft has this provision. They provide OpenAI sources like through the cloud to a lot of firms, and they have this abuse monitoring provision that says that their employees can look at anything that's been submitted if it gets flagged for abuse. So attorneys were freaked out about that because they don't want anyone looking at their clients' information. And so there was a lot of news coverage of this a few months ago. Is it encrypted? So this is something I think many of them are not very encrypted. So if a bad actor were to like try to intercept your requests, would they be able to? Has the client consented? We kind of talked about that. Are there any copyright issues? I think a lot of people are starting to be comfortable that there may be like a decent fair use argument for things you put into these, but I personally try to avoid putting copyrighted information as documents like into the AI models just because I'm nervous about copyright. So those are just questions to consider. So we talked about like using AI for instances with have lower risks of like hallucination or cases where you might not use client data, and also looking for those high volume tasks where you might benefit. And then I'll also mention like ChatGPT and all these models is basically like an average of everything that's been put in them. So if you have something that you want like the most creative, the best brief, like whatever, it's gonna kind of like average it all out and it might not give you the best of best. So for something that you are an expert on, ChatGPT probably won't be as good. But if you're trying to get up to speed on something or deal with like a huge volume of information where you couldn't do it as fast, then it may be more helpful. Okay, I'm gonna skip over these because I think we're about done. And I wanna take a couple questions. So I have some more resources here. These are some things I found helpful in kind of figuring out use cases. Okay, and then I think we have time for maybe like a couple questions if people do have questions. Yes.
Well, my question actually goes back to your very first, you had a link to download the.
Yeah, let me go back there.
And I didn't see that on here.
Yeah, I forgot to put it on the, that version of it. Let me go out of here and I'll get back to that. So this is a bit.ly link and it is bit.ly and then the last part of it is 24FOBBL. Any other questions people have?
Is there an app for mid-page, or how do you?
It's internet. It's a web app. So it's just get it from your browser. So it's
Put in,
yep. So it's I believe it's midpage. Yes, midpage.ai.
And describe the other one.
That one is-
I didn't see a page for that in here.
Yeah, that one is describe.ai.
How do you?
DESCRYBE.ai. Yeah, I was adding a couple things to this last minute. That was one of them.
But those are in the ones you would download.
Yep, yep.
so to do mid-page, you'd have to enter the browser each time you use it,
Yes, yep.
as opposed to, okay.
Other questions? Well, thank you all for your time and
Thank you.
feel free to reach out with other questions you have.
Thank you.